All right, so we're going to continue to work with the Fetch API, and I want to make some other types of requests like put and delete. So we're going to create a little mini project here called typecode to-dos, and we're going to be working with the JSON placeholder API and the to-dos resource. Okay, so you can see that each to-do has a title, an ID, a completed value, which is a Boolean, and a user ID. So I want to, first of all, be able to fetch them and place them in the DOM. All right. And we can limit them right now. You see, if you just go /todos, it gives you 200, but we can send a request to todos, and then we can add on question mark underscore limit, and we can set that to whatever we want. Let's say 5, and that will give us only 5 to-dos. And the reason we can do that is because the API added this functionality. You can't just do this to any old API. So we're going to fetch them, put them on the page. I want to show a dark background. So basically, there'll be a class of done if the to-do is completed. Okay, so if that completed value is set to true. So we want to add that functionality. I also want to be able to add a to-do, so that will make a post request and get a response back and then get added to the DOM. Now keep in mind the data does not persist because this is a mock API, so if we reload the page, that's going to go away, but I at least want to make the request, get the response, and add it to the DOM. And then I also want to be able to update by clicking and toggling the completed value. So if this one is not completed, if I click it, I want to make it have a dark background, but we also need to make a put request so that we can update that value on the server. All right, and again, it's not going to stick. It's not going to actually change in their database. And then finally, I want to be able to double click and have the to-do get deleted. We'll make a delete request, get a response back, and remove it from the DOM. Now later on, I'm not sure which section we'll do it in, but I want to then take this project and implement JSON Server, which is similar to JSON Placeholder. It's by the same developer, but you install it on your system and run it locally. You install it with something called NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. But we're going to get into that later. And the reason I want to do that is because then we can make the data actually stick and have our own, basically our own testing API. All right, so this will probably be a two-part video or two-part project. So in this video, we'll go ahead and fetch the to-dos, and we'll also make it so we can add it. All right, now if we look at the HTML, it's very, very simple. We just have a header, we have a main tag with a form with a single input, and then we have this ID of to-do list. Now these two we can actually get rid of to take out the trash. I don't know why I put that twice, but we can get rid of those because we want to, obviously we want the ones that are on the server. So let's first go ahead and jump into our script, and the first thing we'll do is create a function to get the to-dos. Now as far as the URL for the API, I'm going to put that in a global variable because we're going to use that in multiple places. So that's going to be this, we don't want to include the limit. So just this /todos. We'll add the limit when we need to, you know, when in that function, in that request. But that's going to be the global variable for the URL. Now let's create the get to-dos. And I'm going to use arrow functions just to switch it up a little bit, but you don't have to. So let's say get to-dos, and we're going to want to fetch, and we'll pass in our API URL. Now, if you want to limit it, which I would suggest because it's going to take up a lot of the page, you'll have to scroll down to see your new one. I'm going to limit it by just concatenating here. Let's say question mark, and then we want to do underscore limit equals, and I'm going to say 5, but you can do whatever you want. So that's going to give us a promise. So our dot then, our response object, we want to then return res.json, and then in the next dot then we'll be able to get our data. So let's say data, and for now let's just do a console log of the data, make sure we get that. So we'll come over here and let's just, oh, we need to run the function, that would help. So get to-dos. And there we go. So I'm getting 5 because I put that limit in. If you didn't add the limit, you're going to get, I think, 200. So I want to be able to put this into the DOM. inside of inside this div with the ID of to-do list. It should be a div inside of that. So first thing we'll do is loop through, because remember this is an array, so we want to say for each, and then in here we're going to pass in, oops, what did I do? We're going to pass in a function into for each, and we'll say for each to do. Then I want to first of all create a new div. So it's div, let's say document dot create element, and we want to create a div element. And then I want a text node to be appended, so we'll say div dot append, let's say append child, and let's pass in here document dot and then create text node. And the text is going to be the title of the to-do. Now remember, these are objects. It's an array of to-do objects. We're looping through, we're getting each object. So I want the title, so to-do dot title, to be the text that shows. So after that, let's add it to the DOM by saying document, we'll get element by ID, and that div has an ID of to-do dash list. And then I'm going to append child, and we want to put the div that we just created into that one for each of these to-dos. All right, so if I save that, we should see our 5 to-dos. Now I do want the ones that are true for completed, which I believe is only 1 out of these 5. I want that to have a darker background, so I want it to have a class of done. So what we can do is go right in here and just have an if statement, and we'll say if the to-do dot completed, because that's going to be a Boolean. So if that's true, then let's take the div and let's add the class by doing class list dot add. Remember, we have add, remove, and toggle and replace. So I want to add the class of done. So if I save that, okay, that didn't work. Let's see. If to do, oh, it's completed, not complete. So now you can see this one has a dark background because it's completed. So one other thing I want to do in here is I want to add a custom attribute to each one that has the ID so that I can access that later on when I need to remove it. So what we'll do is we'll use set attribute. So we'll say div dot set attribute, which we learned a while ago. And if you set like a normal attribute, you put like, source or whatever the attribute is. I want a custom attribute. So when you create custom attributes, you should prefix it with data dash. So we're going to say data dash ID, because later when we need to access it, we can use a property called data set. So that's going to be the name of the attribute. The value is going to be the to-do ID. So now let's save that, and if I were to go to my Elements tab and look at one of these, you'll see that they all have this data ID with the ID as the attribute value. Now before we add the functionality to make a post request and add a to-do, I want to put all this into a function called add to-do to DOM, because we're going to do the same thing when we create a new one. So everything that's in this for each, where we create this div down to where we add it to the list, I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to create another function down here called add to do to DOM. And let's see, that's going to take in the to do object, and then let's just paste this stuff in. And then here where we have the for each, we can get rid of the curly braces, and we can just call add to do to DOM and just pass in the to do. So if I save that, we should get the same result. But now we can use this function wherever we want. So now we want to do the create. So what we'll do is add an event listener to that form. And what I'm going to do is create a function called init. And we'll have our event listeners in there, also our get to-dos. And this is going to fire off when the page loads. Okay, and we could even put get to-dos in an event listener. Like we could do document dot add event listener. And we could listen for the DOM content loaded and then call add, not add, get to dos. If I save that, we should see the same result. Now let's add an event listener to create. So that's going to be on, actually we can leave document because we want to select, let's say query selector, and I want to select the form, which I believe has an ID of to-do-form. And we want to listen for a submit. So submit event, and then we're going to call a function called create to do. So let's create that. So const create to do. All right, so create to do, we're going to pass in our event listener here. And I want to stop the default behavior. So we'll say e.prevent default. And let's just do a console log for now. So if I were to put something in here and click, we get 1. Now, we need to get the value of the input, and there's a few ways we could do that, right? We could select the input from the DOM, and then get .value of the input. But since we have access to the form, which is e.target, right? If I do that, you'll see that that's the form. So I want to get the first element in the form, which is this input. Now, there's a method called first child. So this brings us back a couple sections where we looked at how to manipulate the DOM and some of these properties. If we look at the first child, that's actually a text node, because remember, first child is going to give us all of the nodes, not just the element. And right here, since there's a line break, that actually counts as a text node. So what we want to use is first element child, which will only look at element nodes. So if I do that and I click, now we get access to the input. Now obviously we want the value, so let's say .value, and now whatever I type in here, we're going to be able to get. Okay, so what we'll do is I want this to be part of an object. So I'm going to copy this, or cut that, or copy it, whatever, and then we're going to create a variable called new to do. And this is what we want to send to the server, and the title is going to be that, whatever's typed into the text box. And then the completed value, I'm going to set that to false. So whenever we add a new to do, it's automatically going to be false. So we need to make a post request with this as the body. Okay, and we went over that in the last video. So let's say fetch, and we want to pass in our API URL. So it's just going to be slash to dos, because we're making a post request. So we don't put any ID or anything because it doesn't exist yet. We're creating it. All right, now let's pass in our options. So we don't want the method. We want the method to be post. And then for the body, I'm going to say JSON.stringify, because we want to send this as a JSON string, and then pass in the new to do object. So that will get sent in the body. And then for headers, we're going to add an object of content-type, and the type of content we're sending is application /JSON. And that should do it. Now let's go ahead and add our .then down here. So we'll say .then, and that's going to take our response object, and then we want to return res.json. Okay, and then let's add our second .then, and that's going to have the data returned, which is going to be the new object. So what I want to do with this is add it to the DOM. So we'll say add to do to DOM, and then we'll pass in here the data, which is going to be the to do, because that's what it returns, is the to do that you added. All right, so we're not just calling the function when we submit the form and then having that to do just get added to the DOM. What we're doing is making a request, sending it to the server, where usually it would get added to a database, but this is just a mock API. And then when that's done and it's added to the to the server, then we're adding it to the DOM. So that should do it. Let's save and try it out. So I'll just say, I don't know, my to do. Let's click add. So it gets added to the DOM, but also if we go to network, and let's actually just do that again with the network tab open. So I'll say my to do, add it. Down here you can see that we made a request. So this request is the get that we fetched, right? It gives us a 201. The 200. The 201 is the post. So if we click that, you can see in the headers we made a post request, we got a 201, and the response was the object with the title, the completed value, and then the ID. Okay, so the ID is going to be 201. Now the reason the ID is 201 is because there's 200 to-dos, right? If we get rid of the limit here and we look at all the to-dos, and I scroll all the way down, you can see the last one has an ID of 200, so the next one we add is 201. And again, it's always going to be 201 because whatever we add doesn't actually stick. But I can go ahead and keep adding here, so I'll say add again, and if we look at that response, we still get the ID of 201. So these both will have that same ID. If this were a real API and we were persisting to the database, then this would be 202. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's some differences because we're working with a mock API, not a real one. But in reality, you're gonna either be working with your own API that you create with whatever technology, Node.js or PHP, whatever, or you'll be working with like a public API where you can actually post items to. So I think that's where we'll stop for now, and in the next video we'll continue on with the update, so we can click on these and we can update the status or the completed value and also delete them.